Chosen one, what if I told you that without realizing it, you have already saved the life of someone who could completely change your destiny? Now, take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear here is no coincidence. You didn't come across this video by chance. There's a bigger reason you're here, and if you watch until the end, you'll understand that the story I'm about to reveal could very well be yours. While you're listening, do the following. Click the like button so YouTube understands that this message needs to reach more people. Subscribe to the channel right now, because each new video is another step on this journey that can transform your life. And I want you to comment here on the number 22. This will show that you didn't just see it, you felt it. Get ready, because in the next few minutes, you'll discover that that simple gesture you made one day may have been the exact moment when destiny began to conspire in your favor. Some encounters seem casual, but in the silence of the universe, they are orchestrated with surgical precision. That day, nothing indicated that something extraordinary would happen. You weren't seeking opportunities, you weren't searching for important connections, and much less did you imagine you were standing before someone whose name was etched on the list of the most influential and wealthy people on the planet. The scene was ordinary, almost banal. A hallway, a corner, perhaps a room where voices mingled. But there was something invisible hovering in the air, as if time itself had slowed down to allow for a divine moment. It was the meeting of two stories that, until then, had followed parallel paths. What you did in that moment wasn't rehearsed. There was no calculation, no forced posture to impress. The gesture was natural, almost instinctive, but charged with an energy that can't be manufactured. You offered attention, respect, and presence, three rare things in a world where everyone is distracted. And without knowing it, you touched not just that person's mind, but their soul. There were no spotlights, no exchange of cards, not even the notion that that brief interaction would be forever marked. But it was. Years may pass, and yet certain moments remain etched like invisible tattoos. That moment was a turning point for both parties. For you, a simple act that seemed to have no major consequences. For the other, a breath of life amidst an emotional desert. It was the intersection between a heart searching for something real and another that unknowingly carried exactly what was needed. And there, without even realizing it, two destinies changed forever. If this message has touched something within you so far, if in some way you felt that each word made sense for your moment, then I want to invite you to be part of this impact in an even more special way. Click the Valeu de Mai or Super Thanks button, and with it, you can directly support this work. Choose the amount and confirm. If you feel it in your heart, send the maximum amount, 100 lows, because every contribution of this kind helps us continue producing profound stories like this, reaching more lives and bringing this message to those who need it most. This gesture is not just support, it is a partnership in purpose. The world is full of gestures that carry invisible labels, favors with a price tag, smiles with ulterior motives, kindnesses that are merely camouflaged investments. But what happened that day was beyond this logic. You didn't know who was standing before you. You didn't see figures, possessions, or connections. You just saw a human being. This purity is rare, and when someone accustomed to buying everything finds it, the impact is devastating. That billionaire had already experienced every conceivable luxury. Private jet trips, dinners at restaurants where the bill exceeded his annual salary, and businesses that generated more money than entire countries. But none of that could provoke in him the way you did. Your gesture was not for sale, and precisely for that reason, it was impossible to forget. In a world where almost everything is negotiable, your attitude was like a diamond cut by the very hand of God. And when someone who has everything realizes they've found something that can't be bought, a desire arises within them not to possess, but to protect. You, unknowingly, have become a guardian of a value that doesn't fit in safes. Your presence has gone from being just a memory to a reference, and this reference one day may open doors that no request would dare touch. There's a reason why, in that encounter, you didn't recognize who was standing before you. It wasn't distraction, it wasn't ignorance, it was divine strategy. If you had seen the weight of his surname, the brilliance of his wealth, or the reach of his influence, perhaps your attitude would have changed, albeit subtly. But God, in his wisdom, hid that man's identity so that the test would be pure. You weren't standing before a businessman, a tycoon, or a name plastered across business magazines. You were standing before a soul. And what drove your actions wasn't self-interest, it was compassion. While many expend energy trying to enter elite circles, you, effortlessly, entered the only space that truly matters, the space of trust and true gratitude. And that's precisely what transforms encounters like these into spiritual milestones. In that moment, the other party didn't see an opportunist, they didn't see a flatterer. They saw someone genuine, honest, who treated them exactly the same way they would treat anyone else. And that, in a world full of masks, is so rare that it becomes unforgettable. It wasn't dramatic, there were no sirens, no headlines. But in that moment, you stopped a soul from sliding further into an abyss. On the outside, the person before you carried an impeccable image, confident posture, neat clothes, a serene expression. But inside, the cracks ran deep. There were battles no one saw, thoughts no one heard, and a loneliness that not all the luxury in the world could fill. You didn't arrive with ready-made speeches or magical solutions. You didn't promise to solve everything. You were simply present, authentically. Sometimes, the greatest salvation comes not from great deeds, but from small gestures that prevent a greater fall. A word at the right time, a respectful look, or even a welcoming silence. And without realizing it, that's what you offered. Maybe for you, it was just another day. But for him, it was the day the darkness lost its grip. And when someone is pulled back into the light, no matter how simple the gesture, it's never forgotten. The help you gave wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. And heaven records these things much more carefully than we can imagine. There are people who, tired of falsehood, decide to hide behind an ordinary appearance. They trade expensive suits for simple clothes, jets for commercial flights, and blend into the crowd to see who truly sees them as a person. That day, you encountered one of those people. Unbeknownst to you, you were facing a test that many fail. Most people, when they realize someone lacks obvious signs of power or influence, tend to treat them with indifference. But you did the opposite. You didn't measure your respect by appearance, but by the other person's intrinsic value. And it was noticed. Your every gesture, every word, every genuine expression became a memory in that person's mind. Passing this kind of test doesn't bring immediate rewards, but it opens doors that only reveal themselves at the right moment. And when that moment arrives, it won't come as a small token or a passing favor. It will come as a powerful movement, the fruit of a trust earned when no one imagined anything was at stake. Long before that encounter happened, even before you took your first step in this life, something had already been planned. Behind the scenes of time, in a place where there are no clocks or dates, there was a note with your name and a promise waiting for the right moment to be fulfilled. What happened was no coincidence, no chance, no blind fate. It was pure alignment, woven by invisible hands. Life sometimes makes us believe that certain events arise suddenly, but when we look closely, we realize they were already being prepared long before we were aware of them. That day, you weren't just in the right place at the right time. You were exactly where you needed to be, at the precise moment when the spiritual machinery determined that two stories would collide. And the most impressive thing is that you didn't realize the weight of that moment. There were no outward signs to announce it, no solemn atmosphere, no voices echoing from the heavens. It was an ordinary day, one that could go unnoticed. But in the invisible realm, the heavens were paying attention. The gesture you made, the word you spoke, the simple act of being genuinely present triggered a spiritual trigger that had been stored for you. This reward wasn't created because of the billionaire you helped. It was simply activated by this encounter. It was something already stored, waiting for the signal to descend into your life. The natural world cannot explain how doors open effortlessly, how opportunities arise without asking, or how favors arrive without negotiation. But that's how it works when something was already determined before you were even born. Now the wheel has begun to turn, and nothing can stop it. The approaching harvest is not the result of bargaining or human effort. It is the fulfillment of a script written by eternity itself, and the encounter you experienced was merely the scene that began the final act of this promise. Most people mistake kindness for something light, almost superficial. They think it's just a personality trait or a choice to maintain harmony. But that day, what you did wasn't just being kind. It was answering a calling that didn't come from outside, but from within. A silent yet unmistakable voice echoed in your spirit, urging you to act. There was no logic, no visible reward, and yet you acted. This is obedience, and obedience is rarely comfortable. You could have ignored the impulse, you could have gone on your way without looking to the side, you could have thought, "That's not my problem," but you didn't. Something inside you recognized almost instinctively that this moment called for a response. And when you obeyed, without realizing it, you waged a spiritual battle unseen by the naked eye. Your presence prevented certain decisions from being made, certain thoughts from gaining strength, certain failures from becoming irreversible. The most powerful thing is that you didn't have to make a fuss, raise any flags, or prove anything to anyone. Your obedience was disguised as a simple gesture, like a light touch on the surface of a lake that actually causes ripples that reach farther than anyone could imagine. In the spiritual realm, this kind of action is worth more than any grandiose feat displayed before a crowd. You acted when others would hesitate, and heaven never lets this kind of obedience go unnoticed. You believed that exchange of words had ended the moment the encounter ended. You thought it would be lost in the other person's memory, as so many conversations are lost throughout life. But no, that moment not only remained, it also moved. It traveled with that person, entered their home with them, sat at the table during dinner, and without asking permission, became a topic of conversation. And not with just anyone, with someone who holds keys to doors you never knew existed. This person, upon hearing about you, wasn't moved by resumes, portfolios, or elaborate presentations. They were moved by the authenticity of your story. In the world of those in power, true stories are as rare as gemstones. Yours wasn't told with exaggeration, but with sincerity, and it was this sincerity that sparked interest, ignited curiosity, and made someone decide they needed to know more about you. Now, as you go about your life without imagining it, a silent movement is taking place. People are researching your name, watching your steps, checking to see if the impression they've received matches reality. And when they discover that it does, that your essence is as real as what was told, the next act will be inevitable. The opening of a door that no human effort could break down. You didn't ask for this, but the conversation that began so simply is already about to change the landscape of your life. In a world where most exchanges are based on self-interest, there is a currency that almost no one possesses, and that, therefore, has become invaluable. Purity. It's not about naivete, but about a clarity of intentions that cannot be tainted. That day, you offered exactly that. And for someone accustomed to measuring everything in numbers, finding purity was like touching a precious metal not found in mines, but inside rare people. This purity isn't shaped by the pursuit of approval or the need for recognition. It's silent, almost invisible to the naked eye. But when someone with great power and influence encounters it, the impact is profound. The billionaire before you felt something he hadn't felt in years, being seen as a human being, not a title or a bank account. This realization to him was more valuable than any million-dollar transaction. And purity, once recognized, awakens an instinct for preservation. People who handle fortunes know how to protect what has value, but when that value is immaterial, the need for even greater care is needed. Now, even without you knowing it, there's someone out there who feels the need to keep you close, not as a business contact, but as a living reminder that there are still things money can't buy. And this reminder is powerful enough to transform the way they move forward. Most people, when faced with someone powerful, adjust their posture, measure their words, and raise their tone to try to match or impress. You did none of that. You stood firm, without diminishing yourself, but also without inflating your ego. Your humility wasn't submission, it was poise, and this poise was a silent blow to the wall of pride that person carried. There was no direct confrontation, no attempt to prove who was more important. Instead, you simply remained who you are, with a serenity that doesn't need to prove anything. And it's precisely this kind of attitude that unsettles even the most emotionally shielded. The billionaire, accustomed to being the dominant presence in any setting, felt something different. A respect that doesn't kneel, an attention that isn't flattery, a presence that doesn't compete but also doesn't fade. This kind of humility is so rare that it becomes transformative. It not only changes the dynamics of a conversation, but also plants seeds of reflection. Those who live surrounded by adulation lose their sense of reality. But when they encounter someone who can face their material greatness without being intimidated, and at the same time, without becoming exalted, they realize that the true weight lies not in the money, but in the spirit. And that day, their spirit spoke louder. There are words that go unnoticed, like leaves blown by the wind, and there are words that become the foundations of change. That day, you didn't deliver a fiery speech. You didn't prepare an inspiring talk. You simply uttered a sentence, a single sentence, simple, almost unpretentious, yet carrying an invisible weight. The moment it left your mouth coincided with the exact moment the other person was vulnerable, open to hearing something that would break through their inner barriers. It wasn't the beauty of the words, nor the tone of your voice. It was the truth behind them, a truth that penetrated layers of defense and touched the most intimate part of that heart. What you said acted like a mirror. It didn't just show what was on the surface, but reflected what was hidden. It revealed fears, brokenness, habits that had been passed down from generation to generation without his realizing it. Until that moment, his life had been guided by goals of expansion, accumulation, and visibility. But that sentence was like a beacon in the fog, pointing not to what he had, but to what he was building as an inheritance. And inheritance isn't just assets. It's the sum of the marks left on the lives we touch, the values we transmit, the principles we uphold. For someone who had already achieved everything money could buy, realizing his legacy was incomplete, was a shock. His mind began to race through memories, decisions, and relationships, weighing each one in light of what you said. It was as if that phrase had lodged itself in his consciousness, repeating itself silently as he tried to sleep, work, or talk to others. It wasn't just present, it was shaping new paths. And that's why, from that day on, you stopped being just a memory. You became a turning point. That sentence didn't just change a thought, it altered a trajectory. Now your words are intertwined with what he will leave to the world. And when someone influences how another builds their legacy, that influence doesn't fade. It becomes a silent bond that will always find ways to honor the one who brought about that change. In the lives of even the most visible and powerful people, there are moments of invisibility and loneliness that no one imagines. He was surrounded by assistants, bodyguards, business partners, and admirers. But deep down, there was a void, a lack that no superficial company could fill. No one knew it, but days before that encounter, he had said a silent prayer. It wasn't about business, nor about increasing his fortune. It was an intimate request, almost a sigh, asking God to send someone real, someone who would see him not as a brand or a symbol of power, but as a human being. You didn't hear this prayer with your ears, but your spirit was directed to answer it. Without knowing it, you became the embodiment of a request kept in the deepest silence. You didn't arrive with gifts, you didn't arrive with interest, you didn't arrive with expectations. You arrived with presence. And this presence carried something he hadn't seen in a long time: authenticity. You didn't look at him with greedy eyes. You didn't measure him by what he wore or what he could offer. You looked at him as if you were anyone else, and that like anyone else was what made him feel truly special. That moment to you may have seemed brief, but to him it was like a relief that spread through his chest. For the first time in a long time, he could let his guard down. He could speak without fear of being exploited, without having to maintain the posture of someone who controls everything. And even though few words were exchanged, what remained was more valuable than hours of empty conversation: the feeling that genuine encounters still exist in this world. Since then, the memory of that moment has returned to him countless times, not as something that evokes nostalgia, but as a reminder that God truly hears prayers, even those we dare not say out loud. And when an answer comes in the form of a person, that person becomes part of a sacred story. You weren't just someone who passed through his life. You were the fulfillment of a request that perhaps he himself had already given up hope of seeing answered. At first glance, it seemed like just a gesture of support, perhaps an encouraging word spoken at the right moment, but in the invisible realm, it was much more than comfort. It was intervention. At that moment, unbeknownst to you, he was fighting battles unseen on the surface. Old issues, buried traumas, existential doubts, and shadows that had been silently accumulating were about to suffocate your peace. On the outside, his appearance was impeccable. On the inside, there was shaky ground about to crumble. And that was precisely when your presence entered, like a precise blade, cutting through what could no longer stand. There was no need to raise your voice, quote verses, or present complex solutions. Your simple energy carried a healing weight, as if every word and every pause were chosen by something greater than you. What came out of your mouth wasn't just sound, it was an instrument, and it penetrated where no motivational speech or strategy meeting could reach. It was as if, in silence, you were performing invisible surgery, peeling back layers of hopelessness, stemming emotional bleeding, and replacing what had been displaced by pain. This intervention, however silent, brought about a profound change. He may not have realized it at the time, but as the days went by, he began to feel something had lifted. The weight he'd been carrying was no longer the same. The anxiety that had been plaguing him seemed to have lost some of its strength. And even if he couldn't explain it, he knew that relief had been activated the moment you were by his side. And the most surprising thing is that when you help someone in this way, the effect isn't limited to one life. What was broken that day is no longer passed on to future generations. By freeing a heart, you change stories, alter legacies, and close doors to repeated pain. It was spiritual, it was surgical, it was definitive. And heaven keeps a record of this kind of act, not for boasting, but to ensure that when the reward comes, it will be as profound as the healing you brought about. From the moment you entered that room, there was something different in the air. You weren't seeking attention. You weren't trying to compete for the spotlight. You weren't delivering speeches designed to impress. Your presence wasn't a show, it was an outpouring. You weren't sent to win with appearances, but to deposit something he didn't even know he needed. This isn't talent, it's anointing, and anointing isn't manufactured, it's carried. He'd already spoken to brilliant, influential, and intelligent people, but even so, there was a void none of these exchanges could fill. And then you arrive, carrying something that can't be bought: spiritual weight. It's this weight that transforms ordinary conversations into eternal moments, that changes atmospheres without needing a microphone or a stage. What you conveyed wasn't planned. It overflowed. And overflowing is natural for those who live aligned with their purpose. The effect was immediate, yet silent. Beside her he felt peace, a peace so profound it seemed to displace any urgency. He felt clarity, as if his jumbled ideas had found their proper place. And he also felt a slight uneasiness, but not the bad kind. It was the uneasiness that precedes major changes, the kind that makes someone reevaluate priorities and rethink course. This is no ordinary influence. It is a spiritual impact. And now, every time he remembers that moment, he remembers not just you, but the feeling you left behind. Because in the end, those who carry the anointing don't just leave memories. They leave marks that never fade. And these marks compel him to give back, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. He knows he's found something rare and needs to protect, invest in, and multiply it, not as a gesture of kindness, but as a response to something sacred. Every seed planted with purity carries within it the power to multiply. But some seeds are so special that heaven itself decides the exact moment of harvest. What you did at that encounter was more than just helping. It was sowing in fertile soil, at the perfect moment with the right intention. And since that day, that seed has grown, silently but steadily, watered by memories, gratitude, and the invisible hand of God. Now the time of waiting is coming to an end. Just as the earth prepares itself silently before bursting into bloom, your life has been working behind the scenes. Doors you never dared knock on are about to open, and connections that seemed unattainable will emerge effortlessly. It's not coincidence, it's not luck, it's a harvest, and a harvest isn't a favor, it's a result. What lies ahead is not just a material reward. It is a complete reversal of scenarios. Where there was scarcity, there will be abundance. Where there were closed doors, there will be multiple accesses. Where there was silence, there will be invitations. And all of this will not be small or discreet. It will be great, because the seed was planted in obedience and watered with integrity. And when that moment comes, you'll realize it's not just about receiving something. It's about seeing the confirmation that every pure act, every selfless gesture, and every response to the call to help was recorded. And more than recorded, it was valued to the point of returning to you in a proportion only the divine can calculate. This harvest isn't just yours, it's a legacy that will touch generations.